All right, so we're going to start off with a little clarification of the difference between applications and resumes, because we get this question quite a bit. In fact, it's made me think. I've had some great questions about this. People have often asked, why do I have to fill out an application and then put the same exact information on my resume? In fact, sometimes what you do is you upload your resume and it pre-fills the application to an extent. And there's a lot of people who question, why do we need both methods? And the easiest way I can explain it is applications are a filtering device created by the employer. It's what they want to know. So they'll ask questions that you would never talk about in your resume, or at least you shouldn't, such as, why did you leave your last job? Or may I contact your former supervisor? Those are questions they want to know, not necessarily information that you want to give them. So think of the application as a filtering device and think of your resume as a marketing piece. They both have their place. When I look at it that way, I always try to think of, what would I like to be? Would I like to be filtered, or would I like to be marketed? And so I want you to at least think about this as we go through today's workshop. A resume is often used as an attachment to an application, but it shouldn't just be used as that. It's a marketing piece. It can be used in a lot of different methods. One of them could be to send out to your references, to inform them of what you've been doing and the skills you're promoting about themselves, and maybe some talking points they might have. You can send it out to your network, your friends, your family. Certainly, it's something you can have reviewed by a career force specialist. You know, the more people who know about your skills, the more likely they are to make connections to employers who have needs. So don't just let your resume sit as an attachment to an application. I mean, that's certainly the main use for many people, but expand your kind of perception of what a resume is for and what it can be used as. Another part of applications and resumes is that they're seen by different people in many situations. I was kind of shocked by this. It really was an aha moment for me. I was in an interview and they asked me a question. They asked me a question that I had answered on the application. You know, it was the wage, you know, how much are you looking for? And I thought, well, you had that information. And I was shocked that they had never seen the application. In many larger organizations and even some medium-sized organizations, it's a different department that looks at the applications. They may also look at the resume, but they're certainly going to look at the application, and they're going to filter down the number of qualified candidates to a reasonable amount. And let's say that I post a really good job and I get 100 candidates. The interview panel is not going to look at 100 resumes. They're going to look at maybe 10, maybe 5 resumes. They may actually just get the interview pool. And in that case, they're probably not going to ever see the application. And the reason that's important is you have to sell yourself both ways to both clients, basically, or both entities. So if you're wondering why you put your dates of employment on the application and then put them on the resume, it's because they both expect to see work history. So anyways, I hope that kind of explains the process. I'm going to give you some tips on filling out applications next, but that should explain the differences and why you do both. So as far as applications go, when you see one application, you've seen one application. They're all a little bit different, but most of them have similar processes and similar information they're trying to get at. But it's very important to read the instructions carefully, especially if you are filling it out in person, which still happens, by the way. Most of them are filled out online. I get that. But there are situations in which you go in and you fill out an application. One of the options, and I got to make sure I don't hit my mute. I've got a little mute button here. So if I go on mute for some reason, it's because I pressed this, and I'll look at the chat to make sure that I didn't mute myself. So one of the really nice things about online applications is they don't let you leave things blank. If something's required, it doesn't allow you to go on the next screen in many cases without filling in that information. You'll get a little red X, and then it's really frustrating. You got to scroll up and find out where you missed some information. That happens quite often. On paper applications, you don't have that. Therefore, if you don't read the instructions carefully, where it says fill out all fields completely, that's a filter. You may get down to something that you don't think applies to you or you don't want to fill out and you leave it blank. That's one of the first filters employers use, is if they see something blank, a blank field, and they have enough applicants to kind of sort through, they'll just throw those out. I've seen it happen. So fill it out completely. Also, keep good records of the jobs you've applied to at organizations. Know where you've applied. I'm not a, I very rarely print anything anymore. We've become fairly paperless in the last 10 years. However, if I'm going to apply for a job and I have the ability, I'm going to print off that job posting. And that way, when I fill out that application, I print that off if I can. I staple the job posting to it, and I keep it in my files, paper files. I know that's kind of old school, and you can maybe even make digital copies, I guess. The reason I do this is if I'm lucky enough to get an interview for that, they may have not had that job posting out there, and it might not be easy to get that job description or the job posting. And now it's going to be really important to how I prepare for that interview. So if at all possible, and it should at all times be possible in some way, make a copy of the job posting to keep in your records along with the applications you've sent out. Read the small print. Include your signature confirming accuracy and truth of the information you provided. It's a legal document. So when you say something on an application, it can come back to haunt you, not only for that job, but I've even seen it hurt someone when they apply for a promotion within a company. Because when you apply for a promotion, they're going to go back to that original application and may take a closer look at that. And I've seen situations when someone lost a job that they've been doing a great job at, but they lied on their application. So when you sign that, you're saying this is true. And in most cases, it's not that we're lying, it's that we didn't take the time to look up maybe dates of employment. And this can become very important when it's a requirement. If a job posting says you need to have 5 years of experience, and you think, well, it was around 5 years, I know it was close to that, and you put 5 years on your application, you're saying you have 5 years. And especially for government jobs, state or federal jobs, they're very, very particular about that, to the point that they'll even go to the day to make sure that you have exactly 5 years, because it's a requirement. Once it's a requirement, they themselves are legally obligated to only consider people who have that experience. So what I recommend is do the best job you can to look up all of your job history. And I know that's not easy at times. Businesses close, go out of business. It was a long time ago, whatever. Do whatever you can to find the best information you can. And sometimes that's calling the former employer. I know for myself, I was looking up something and I needed to find something from, I think it was 2000. And I called that former employer. They had changed names, they had changed locations, but they still had my employment records. So I was able to get the exact date I started. And that really helped me out for some information I had to fill out. What I'm going to be sending everybody to help you keep good records is a data record. I'm going to give you a one you can print out and one you can fill out as a digital copy. And the reason for this is you don't want to look this up twice. So whenever you get the information, maybe it's the job title, the promotion dates, when you left the company, you don't want to have to look that up again. So get it all, keep good records. For myself, I do it a couple different ways. I do have paper. I even have a file cabinet that I keep things in, but I also keep it in online storage. And if you have a Gmail account or you have an Outlook account or an MSN account, you already have free access to what's called cloud storage. So in Google, with a Gmail account, it's called Google Drive. With Outlook or MSN, it's called OneDrive. And there's Dropbox and there's all sorts of other free services that allow for this. The beauty of that is if you upload your information, like say your resume or a copy of your cover letter or your data record, that's going to stay there, pretty much guaranteed, even if your computer crashes, even if you have a catastrophe and maybe lose all of your information. All you need is access to that account on any computer in the world, and now you can access your resume, your cover letter template, all that kind of stuff. So if you have any questions about that, one of the links I'll also be sending you, I'm going to be sending you a lot of links, is information on cloud storage. It's part of some overall training that I'll be sending you on Microsoft Word and Microsoft Office. It's just something that'll make more sense, I guess, as we go along. I'll talk more about it. But one of the links within that email I'm going to send you will be about cloud storage. Give yourself plenty of time to fill out an application. Do not wait until the last minute to fill them out. Think of yourself as an employer. Would you consider the person who fills out the application in the first couple days to be more invested in that opportunity than maybe someone who filled it out at the very last minute? I know even some employers, even if they have a date, it's open from this date to this date, sometimes they'll only take 100 applicants and then they cut it off. So don't wait until the last minute, and certainly don't get your information together until the last minute. I get that happens sometimes. Sometimes you just find out about an opportunity at the last minute. I'm not saying don't apply, certainly apply. But if you have control over it, apply as quickly as you are able to get a good product together. Okay. If something does not apply on an application, you can put in NA or not applicable on that. That's better than you leaving it blank. So let's talk about resumes now that we've had a real brief intro to applications. Is there a perfect resume? I'm not going to ask you to answer that because it's a nuanced response, I guess, would be the right answer is there is, I guess. I mean, some people would say, no, there's no perfect resume. I said there is a perfect resume. It's the one that gets you the job. And that can look a lot different in many situations. I've seen someone write their information on a napkin and get a job. I've had someone write their resume in crayon and get a job. Now, I would never recommend either of those tactics. I'm saying put out the best possible product you can. However, on time is better than late. And sometimes we put out a imperfect product simply because of time considerations. However, if you get a good template together, if you get a good base resume together, you're going to have a really good jumping off part. I'm going to read one of these here. I tried to find my exact dates on one job. So I didn't have the exact dates. Yeah, so if you don't know, and this is a message that came in privately, if you don't know the exact dates, err on the side of caution and use the first day of that month, if you know the month, because that's going to give you the best ability to, it's going to be at least that. It's going to be at least that amount. You don't want to overestimate. Not the worst, but the last possible resource you have is a paid resource, and that is contacting the Social Security Administration. For I think it's up to like $100. They will look through all your paid work history and give you a report back. If you ever do go down that route, again, make sure you save that information so you never have to look it up again. But yes, I totally agree. If you do not know the exact day, use the first day of that month. Now, I'm going to be talking about what we call best practices. Best practices isn't hard and fast. I wish it were to make it easy. We could say, this is the thing you should do. This is the best practice. This is what we recommend. That changes based on specific knowledge. And by that, I mean, I live in the Duluth area, and I know employers around here. I've talked to employers for 20 years around here. I do not know employers in Rochester. Even though Duluth and Rochester both have a heavy medical presence, and there are a lot of medical jobs there, how you apply to each of those locations or areas it might be different. So the best practices in Duluth may not be the best practices in Rochester. I'm going to give you what we call statewide best practices, kind of what is the general norm. But if you have specific knowledge, you have to be comfortable with it. You're going to know your line of work much better than anyone you probably talk to. So if there's things that you don't agree with that you hear in resumes, and you will, by the way, you'll hear things you don't agree because everyone has an opinion. You have to be comfortable with it. You have to sell it. So here's a one way of looking at resumes, and this is just an acronym that we use. One, it's a review of your qualifications, and that's why we say only go back 10 to 15 years. As with everything I'm going to be talking about today, there are exceptions to this. There are reasons to go back further than 10 to 15 years, but there has to be a reason. If there isn't a reason, if there isn't a valid reason to go back that far, then don't, because it's just a review of your qualifications. It's not everything you've ever done for everyone you've ever done it for. Most employers are looking for current skills. And let's say that you have current skills in accounting, but you also have accounting skills back in the 80s. That's still good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Those are skills that they're looking for, but there's plenty in the last 10 to 15 years to meet the qualifications. So just leave it at that. You don't have to go back to the beginning of your work history. A resume is only to gain enough interest to get you to the next phase. Okay? You don't want to undersell it. You don't want to give them everything either. Everything for most people would be overwhelming for an employer. It would be many, many, many pages. We usually recommend 1 to 2 pages. I know it'd be very difficult to get all of your related skills in that amount of space, but again, it's only to create enough interest. Even though you have more information, in some cases, there's diminishing returns on that. And by that, I mean, think of yourself as an employer who's quickly trying to scan through a bunch of resumes to get an interview pool. If one person sends you a 10-page resume, they're expecting you to engage for a long period of time. And most employers don't want to do that at this stage. When they're in the decision-making stage, yes, they're going to want all sorts of information from you, and you can respond to that. But all you're responding to now is the job posting. So give them enough information to let them know that you are qualified and interested in this position. So it's essential information only. There are some things that we put on a resume, a base resume, that don't relate to a specific resume. If you only get one thing out of today's presentation, and I certainly hope you get more, is that each resume needs to be customized to the needs of the current employer that you're marketing yourself to. This does not mean you rewrite your resume completely for every employer. It just means you look at your resume and you ask yourself, does this have the words they have used to describe the skills I have? I use this term a lot. Use their words to describe your skills. You don't make something up. You never lie on your resume, but you change the wording and you include things on one resume that you might not include on another, even if it's in the same field, because different employers look for different things. I'll give you an example. So since about 2000, I have been doing this type of work. I've been training people on job-seeking skills. At different points in my career, I've called that training. I've called that educating. I've called that facilitating. There's a lot of different ways you could talk about it. And I can stand behind each of those terms. If one employer is looking for a facilitator, I can talk about that. If one is looking for a trainer, I can talk about that too. I'm going to use their terms to describe my skills. That way I'm familiar to them and they want to hire someone who is familiar to their needs. Skills-based, S. If you haven't done this already, the start of most job searches should start by identifying your skills. And that's what we did last week. We talked about the skills identification. And like I said, if you want to go back and review that, that information is up on the CareerForce YouTube site. We have on careerforcemn.com a set of skills identification surveys. And you can go on there and you can take them and it'll tell you the skills that are common to certain types of industries. You can also fill out a questionnaire and it'll say, hey, based on this, here's the skills I think you could probably talk about. This is important because unless you go through an exercise like this, we tend to make assumptions about someone's understanding of our previous work. We think that someone's going to understand that because we were a controller for a company that we have accounting skills or financial skills or Excel skills. They only know what you tell them. And job titles by themselves do not paint the whole picture. So sometimes you have to break down those skills. And the most needed skills from that employer will be spelled out on their job posting. Don't make any assumptions. Talk about the skills they're asking for. A resume also needs to be unique, and I want to be very careful about how I describe this one. Unique does not mean it's something they've never seen before. It does not mean it's formatted in a way that calls attention to itself. The formatting of your resume needs to be clean and precise, but it doesn't need to be fancy. In fact, I think fancy has the opposite effect. It makes it look like you don't understand what a resume looks like. I've seen people create resumes that are extremely flashy, that have lots of colors and graphics. I had one that was filled out in spiral, meaning that not impressive, but it was, you read it from the center and you went on the spiral all the way around. That resume did not get an interview. Most of them don't, because all an employer is looking for is, can I quickly and easily find the information I want? So what do I mean by unique? It's what makes you special. So in this example, an example I'm talking about, a unique resume comes from your own personal experience. So I'm going to be sending everyone a template of a resume, and it'll have some real information in it. It'll have someone else's real information on it. Imagine if you're an employer and every resume you got had the same information. I'm a people person. I love to work with people. I have great customer service skills, and Microsoft Office is something I use daily. You're going to hear that over and over and over and over again. And it gets to the point where nothing stands out. If instead someone told you about a specific situation in which they had been successful for their employer and maybe quantified it, talked about the dollar amount or the percentages or the number of people served that were increased or enhanced by their efforts, that's a unique story that no one else can tell in the exact same way. That's what makes resumes stand out, not the look, but the content. It's a marketing product about you, so make it about you. Don't take credit for something you didn't do, but take credit for the things that you were part of or you did by yourself. We call that balancing the I and the me statements, or the I and the we statements. So you don't want to say that you did everything for a company, but you also don't want to say that you were only part of a group that did everything for a company. You know, there are things that we do ourselves and there are things that we do as part of a team, and you want to balance those stories. Unless it's effective, and that's the E, you need to change it. No matter how much great feedback you receive from everyone you send it to, if employers aren't giving you that feedback, if you're not getting interviews, then you need to change it. And I'll give you a couple of different formats you can use to change up your marketing. Sometimes that's all it takes. And then it's specific, and that's what I talked about. The end goal of every resume is to meet the specific needs of that employer so you can get an interview. So like I said, 1 to 2 pages is normal. I've seen 18-page resumes in something called a curriculum vitae, a CV. You'll hear that differently in different areas. CV, sometimes like on the West Coast, they will say, send me your CV, when they really mean what we would determine to be a resume here. In most cases, in Minnesota at least, or the Midwest, a CV is specific to academia or people who've been published, like doctors who have had peer-reviewed articles or something like that. In those cases, there's a very specific format, and the assumption from employers is they will be receiving a large document. There's also project-based resumes. If someone maybe was had a whole bunch of building projects, it might have a several-page resume for that, because it needs time to expand on everything that was done. But for most jobs, a 1 to 2 page resume will suffice. Remember, the goal of it is just to get you into an interview, and they'll ask you all the rest of the information they need to know then, as long as you deal with what they need to know. And those are the qualifications, requirements. If you want to go into the preferred requirements, absolutely, you can certainly do that. If that stretches your resume to 2 pages, there's a reason for that. But you want to take out any filler. And I'll talk about filler as we go along here. But I want to show you something that's kind of a cool visual on what a resume looks like to someone reviewing it. So this was taken from a website called theladders.com. And what they did is they were able to track someone's eye movement, just kind of like your phone. Your phone can track your eye movement and self-scroll. They were able to track the eye movements of a recruiter. And I know you can't read these resumes, and that's on purpose because that's not what we're intending here. What we're intending is to look at the format and how the format plays into where someone's eye goes. So you notice on this left-hand side here, we've got a very densely packed, very narrative format, meaning that, you know, each of the bullets here are several lines. It's a lot to read through. There's no white space at the bottom. And you see that they do look at the top of it quickly, and they read through a few bullets there, and then they kind of trail off, and they never get to the bottom. And then on the right-hand side, this is a better formatted resume. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it's better. And it's got headings, and it's got things that are spaced out, and there's some white space, and that's what white space means. It means space that is white. It allows your eye to rest and distinguish between sections of a resume. You can see that they started at the top, and they were very interested in the education of this person. So they spent a lot of time there, but they went through the entire resume. All right, I'm going to take a quick question here. What if the position you want is relevant to skills from 20 years ago? Okay, so okay, so someone's asking, what if the most relevant experience you have is 20 years ago? In that case, you would use a type of resume that we'll talk about in just a little bit here called a combination resume. Or you could use a section called other related experience. I would use a combination resume actually, because what it would allow you to do is put the most relevant information at the top of your resume. And then you're going to have to back it up with your employment, but now it becomes a line item at the bottom of your resume. It's just, I worked at this company from this time to this time. That's where I got this experience. But because chronologically it was a long time ago, I put it at the top. Now you're going to have to overcome any objections they might have to, is this current? So I'll give you an example. I worked, one of the first jobs I had was database entry for an insurance company. I entered in, I maintained 5,000 files for an insurance agency on those old, green screen monitors, and sat in front of those green screen monitors for 8 hours a day. And I did data entry. For the next 13 years, I did Alzheimer's care. And I did nothing I didn't touch a computer for 13 years. Now, after those two jobs, wildly different jobs, I was going back into computers. So I had computer-related experience over 10 years ago. I needed to tell that employer that those skills were still current. So in those cases, you should have something more current, like training. Maybe you did a free online training course, or maybe you were involved in a group that had similar, maybe you were involved in a networking group, or you were involved in a realtors group or something like that, that made those skills more current. You want to get a current date on those skills. We'll talk about that as we go along, but I wanted to answer the question. Okay, make it scannable. You want to use bold or capital letters to highlight information. Try to stay away from going up and down with the size of your characters. And by that, that's the point. Like 12-point text was the standard for many years. Now it's 11-point text. That's just the size of the text. The exception to that is your name. You can put your name at a higher, you should 16 to 18 point, and that should stand out. It should be bolded, it should be at the top. But everything else, you can achieve the same kind of eye-catching appeal by bolding or capitalizing in bolding, in some cases underlining, but you want to be careful about a lot of this. Like, you want to avoid a ton of italicizing, underlining, borders, lines across the page, text boxes, especially text boxes, or graphics or color. I know that might seem fairly dull, but you're not impressing them with your graphic design unless you are a graphic designer. I've seen a lot of those resumes. Those are interesting ones. You can use some of this, but be very sparing and especially avoid text boxes. If you know what a text box is, that's an easy way of moving information around your screen because you just draw a box and you fill it in with text and it becomes movable. You can move it all around. The problem with that is that's not something that an applicant tracking system will pick up. Applicant tracking systems are the computer programs that looks for keywords within your resume. So if you attach your resume to an application, in many cases, an applicant tracking system is the first line of defense for that employer. It's going to scan for those keywords, and then it's going to spit out the top 20, top 100 resumes or applications for someone to actually look at. And if some of those keywords were in a text box, it might not allow for that. One thing to keep in mind, when you capitalize things in Microsoft Word or any word processing program, spell check does not look at those. I've seen this quite a bit. So let's say you said attention to detail in capital letters. If you didn't spell something correctly, you're not going to get that nice little red squiggly line underneath it to tell you that you didn't. Word or Microsoft Word assumes it's an acronym and it doesn't spell check it. So put it in lowercase first and then change it to uppercase. All right. And that brings up a good point. Not everyone's a Microsoft Word, specialist. Not everyone has those skills. One of the trainings I'm going to be sending you is for Microsoft Word because creating resumes does kind of predicate that you have some digital skills. However, if that's not something you're really good at and it's not part of the work you plan on doing, please take advantage of the Career Force system to have someone review your resume. We can't write a resume for you because we don't know what you've done. But if you give us the information, the type of work you've done, where you've done it, who you've done it for, the time frames, the skills you've used, we can help you with some of the formatting and we can get another set of eyes on it. One of the best resumes I ever saw had 6 spelling errors on it because of the capital letters. And if I hadn't looked at it, that person would have sent it off. And that's not a good first look to have 5 or 6 spelling errors on a resume. And she did have, by the way, attention to detail wasn't one of the misspelled words, but attention to detail in her resume. And then she sent them proof that she didn't have it. So anyway, some things to think about. On a resume, just some of the basics are be honest and positive. You should never go negative on a resume. I don't see this a lot. I see this in interviews more than I see it in resumes, but you should never talk poorly about a former coworker, former customer, or your former boss on your resume. And in an application, you shouldn't do that either. So that begs the question, how do I describe a job I was fired from? A lot of people get fired. There's a lot of good people who get fired. They're not asking that question to take you out of consideration. They're going to hire a lot of people who've been fired from jobs. They just need to know it's not going to affect them. So the best way to fill that out on an application, because you can't explain anything, you can't answer any questions, is just to put involuntary separation on the application. On a resume, you don't deal with it at all. On a few occasions, I've seen people try to explain why they left jobs. Don't do that on a resume. It takes up space and it's not needed. You need to focus on your accomplishments, what you completed or did. And all of us really, truly have amazing stories. The reason we don't think they're amazing is we lived them and we did it on a daily basis and it didn't seem that incredible to us. When you describe it to someone new, it becomes much more interesting. And sometimes we have to talk through what we did on a daily basis with someone to bring out those stories, to bring out those accomplishments. And it needs to be targeted to each position. That's important also. Like I said 3 times already, unless it's targeted to the position, it may not work. It may work for the previous employer you sent it to, but remember, every employer is different. They describe your skills differently, and you need to talk in ways that they understand. A big question we get from many people is, I'm not getting jobs I'm highly qualified for, and I'm getting this, I'm overqualified. I can't help if I'm overqualified. No, you can't. You can't help if you're overqualified, but you can help how you market yourself to that employer. You can't overcome objections on a resume. In an interview, you can't. You can respond to questions or objections they may have. On a resume, you can't. So An overqualified resume is not a targeted resume because you're not speaking to the needs of that employer. Again, we never lie. We never lie on a resume, but what we choose to put on there is only things that benefit us. And there's some extreme examples I can give you, but I will be sending you one of the extra kind of add-on documents I'll be sending is how to overcome objections to overqualification. And that's very important on a resume and on an interview process. But I'll give you one example. Let's say that they require you to have a bachelor's degree, but you have a master's degree, and it's not in the preferred qualification. So it's not listed at all. They have no interest in a master's degree because in some cases they might have to pay you extra for a master's degree. That's going to be an issue at some point. But on a resume, it doesn't have to be an issue because you can leave it off. You can leave off education. You can't on an application, because on an application, they're going to say, what's the highest degree you've obtained? And you might say, well, if I put it on my application, it's the same as putting it on my resume. It's not, because in some cases, a lot of cases actually, who looks at your resume is different who looks at your application. And I'm not trying to make anyone dishonest here. That's absolutely not the truth. But I want to make sure that you don't get filtered out of jobs that you are truly interested in because of the employer's previous experience with someone with your set of skills. And I'll tell you why they do this. It's not because they don't want to get more bang for their buck. It's not that they don't want to get someone who has more skills than they need. It's that they, through experience, have realized that many people who are overqualified don't work out for a variety of reasons. And one of the biggest problems is as soon as a job comes up that will pay them for their experience, they will jump to that job. Employers are always looking for return on investment. They're looking at, if I go through this whole process, which can sometimes take months to do, and then there's a year of training involved, will it pay off for me in the end? Or will I have a dissatisfied employee who is understimulated and who will move on? Someone asked a question, are embedded hyperlinks, email addresses, or LinkedIn profiles okay? I personally have no problem with them. I have heard people say that embedded links are bad. In the case of LinkedIn and email, I have no problem with them whatsoever, as long as they're properly linked. Of course, you're not going to link to, embed a different link, which can be done, by the way. It does a couple of things. One, it makes it very easy for them to click on it and open up, their email or get to your LinkedIn account. The other thing is, and this is kind of a weird deal, it adds a little color to your resume in a professional way. It makes them blue. Similar to if you sign your cover letters in blue ink and put a digital signature in blue, it adds a little color in a way that isn't gaudy. Speaking of LinkedIn, we do have a LinkedIn class coming up. You do not have to have a LinkedIn account on your resume, but if you have a good account, a well-developed account that is in line with the type of work that you're currently applying for, it can benefit you. You don't have to have it, but you determine, is it going to add to this, or will it confuse the person? Will it create like a digital split personality in which my resume is about bartending and my LinkedIn profile is about accounting? That's not going to help you. Okay, so let's go on to resume basics. Choose a format. We'll talk about the formats here in just a minute. The top third of your resume is the most valuable, so choose the format that allows you to talk about the most relevant skills you have in the top third of the resume. You want to include white space, as I mentioned. That's at the margins and spaces in between sections, and make it error-free. Can't stress this enough. Have your resume reviewed by somebody. Either it's by a career force specialist or maybe one of your references or someone you trust, someone you network with. Could even be your family or friends. If they don't know you very well, they're going to be much more objective about looking at your resume because it needs to make sense to a new person. If they make assumptions about your work history, they're not going to be able to look at it as well. So resumes can be formatted in a variety of ways. There are two main ones we recommend, and there's one in between. The chronological is the time-tested way that many people have put out resumes for decades, and that is organized by job history, most recent first. So actually, it's a reverse chronological resume. Employers really like this because it allows them to see the most current skills first. And the most current skills are going to be the most up-to-date skills, of course. And if they relate to their needs, they have two things there. They have the most current related skills shown at the top. Now, in the example of the question someone had asked, they had some very relatable skills from 20 years ago. Chronological is not your friend there because you're going to have to get to the bottom of that resume to get to the related skills. So in that case, we would use something called a combination. But to get to combination, we have to talk about what combination is. Combination is a merging of chronological and a functional or skills-based resume. I do not recommend a functional or skills-based resume because that is just your skills, your related skills, without an attachment to work history. There are some hybrids that are kind of between combination and functional, but a true functional resume would be used by someone who doesn't have any work history and is pulling on life experience, or someone who's been out of the work for 20 years and is reentering the workforce and marketing skills from their past work history and what they've been doing in those 20 years. Most employers who look at resumes need to see dates. If they don't see dates, in some cases, they filter those resumes out. Now, if you truly are without work history, hey, everyone starts at some point. Contact your local career force location, set up a one-on-one meeting, and let's get started. You started on that process because everyone has skills to market about themselves, and we can give you some effective ways to do that. But if you have work history, use either chronological or the combination, which is the combination of the two above. Whichever format you use the one that tells your story the best. And you want to target every one of them to the job you're applying for. Excuse me just a moment. So let's take a look at these. And you will be getting these, by the way. This is the Robert Doyle resume. This is the chronological resume. And what it does, it starts with a summary, has some selected skills. There's you have a lot of wiggle room in how you do any of these resumes. So don't think that it has to strictly be what one template says to be a chronological resume. Sometimes you'll even see an objective statement. Those are kind of going out of vogue, but if you do use them, make sure you take out what is currently there. Because in many cases, it'll say something like objective, seeking a rewarding career utilizing my many years of experience. That doesn't say anything to an employer. It's been used so much, it's lost all meaning, and it's at the very top of your resume. So if you do have an objective statement that you want to use, I would just say objective, then list the title of the job from the job posting and where you found it. So example could be objective, millwright position posted on a company website, posting number I15367. That does a couple things. If your resume is printed off and it's sitting on someone's desk, they know exactly it's in relation to. And you've also given them feedback on where their marketing has been successful. MinnesotaWorks.net, which is the state's job bank, is free or at no additional cost to employers. So if they find that a lot of the people they're getting come from MinnesotaWorks.net, now they know where to put their marketing. If they see it's from Indeed or from their company website, that also gives them information. So it gives them a little feedback and doesn't waste a whole bunch of space. Then we go into some selected skills or expertise. Be aware that these are unverified. These are just words. And I tend to use these in some situations and not in others. Where I would use them is if someone were, in this case, they were doing some like production assembling, and they can talk about spot and wire welding, fabrication, blueprint. They're very specific. If they're soft skills like customer service, attention to detail, teamwork, I would be less likely to put them up there because they don't. They're not verified. They're much. I guess it would be much better to give examples in the bullet points under each of the positions. That's just my opinion, but be careful of putting too much into your selected skills and expertise because they're at a discount. They're discounted because they're not, there's not given examples of or results from. And then you go into your work history and we put it in dates of employment. If you have to get very specific, you can go to months in years. Just be consistent throughout. Don't go months, years in one, and then just years in the other. If it is a government job and you have really, really close to the required, meaning you just have enough of the required expertise, I've even seen it where it's important to go to the day, like January 5th of 2001 through, January 6th of 2022, whatever. Again, if you're very close on that, make sure that you can verify from the employer will verify that you have that exact amount, because the more exact you get, the more likely they're going to assume this is the actual dates of employment. And then education is usually at the bottom. And the reason for that is if you've got work history, it's the least important. I'm not saying it's not really important because, it might be a requirement, but it's the one thing they're just looking for. Do you have it? If you have to have a bachelor's degree in something and you got that bachelor's degree 20 years ago, it shouldn't be at the top of your resume. Now, if you just got your bachelor's degree or your master's degree or a certification or whatever, and it's the most recent thing you have, then yeah, you can consider putting it at the top, because you might not have a lot of related experience, work experience, to back that up. So you always want to put whatever's most important at the top. If your dates of, if your education's over 5 years old, consider leaving the dates off. And then I wouldn't put any dates of high school diploma either. Yeah, so someone had put example of technical leadership, and that would be another example of where I use the selected skills and expertise. So if I did programming and maybe I have C++ or Ruby or Python, absolutely, that's a great way of putting that information in there. If they're looking for specific words, specific platforms, that's a real quick way of showing that I have similar experience. Now, be careful though. I've seen that date people too. I know how to program Pascal, or at least I used to. That's a dead computer language. That's not going to do me any good. So maybe I would say computer programming experience instead of using that specific. And then only give them as much information as they need. I've seen people put real current ones, and then they go all the way down to COBOL and Fortran. And in almost all cases, that is only going to date you. Those are computer programs, by the way. A functional resume is, again, like I said, just the skills, and might even have some education or training or personal development, but it doesn't have any work history in most cases. And I would stay away from this one unless you absolutely have to use it. But it does create the basis for our next one, which is the combination resume. It allows us to put the most important accomplishment and skill sets at the top of our resume. So this, for many people, myself included, is something I at least consider for every job I apply for. Even if I have current work history that relates to their needs, I can sometimes spell it out better through a combination resume than I can a chronological resume. And I'll give you an example of my current job. I told you I am the job service program coordinator for the state. There's only one person who has the job I have, and there's probably only one person who actually understands what I do in this job. Putting that at the top of my resume may not tell them that I have training experience or I have advanced Excel spreadsheet experience. I could spell that out a lot better for them by talking about the skills inherent to my position than listing the position itself, because they become the headings, the skills become the headings, not bullet points within the job description. How would you deal with, okay, so the question is, how would you deal with big breaks between jobs, breaks because of things like illness, whatever, things that are private? Exactly. This happens to a lot of people. One thing, we're in the best possible time for that to happen to anybody, being that there are, I think, 10 to 15 jobs posted for every person who's applying. And that means that employers are not going through resumes like they used to. They're not looking for little tiny things to take you out of consideration. If you are interested in working and have the skills they need, gaps in work history play a much smaller part in their decision. However, like any gap in work history, what they're going to want to do is know what you were doing during that time to make yourself still relevant in that field. This is where volunteer work come in. This is where organizational activities come in. You can use volunteer work in a chronological resume as long as you put volunteer position and are honest about what you did in that. So there are times where I even leave volunteer work off a resume because it doesn't hold a place. It doesn't have a purpose. But if you have gaps in work history, volunteer work can kind of show what you were doing during that time. Be willing to tell them that during this time, you don't have to go into specifics about, I was dealing with an ill parent or taking care of my child or whatever, but you can say that I was played a leadership role in the parents and education. Now, right then, what I'm doing is I'm exposing something they can't ask about me. I'm telling them I have kids. But my take is, if it benefits me to tell them something they can't ask, I'll tell them because it overcomes an objection potentially. I'm okay with people knowing I have kids. I understand they can't ask me that, but if it helps me to expose something that I did as a parent, I'm going to do it. But again, that's a personal decision, and you're going to have to take that on a case-by-case basis. A combination resume then puts your employment history as line items, meaning that you're just going to say, here's the job title and here's when I did it. And there are even hybrids of this too. In some cases, they're going to put skills with documentation of those skills, and then they might even put employment with a couple bullet points under each employment. So don't get too wound up on the very, very rigid definitions of these. These are some general guidelines for these types of resumes. So just go through the basics of the resumes. The first one is your heading. And like I said, you're going to put your name a little bit bigger. Whether you choose to put your address on that or not is up to you. There are reasons for both. Make sure you have a professional email address. I put it at either Gmail or Outlook. I would stay away from Yahoo or AOL because it tends to date you and just present as less professional. If you have those accounts, fine, that's no problem. But create a new Gmail or Outlook account just for job service, just for job search. Another thing is the summary or objective. And like I said, if you're going to do objective, make it count. This is my objective, this mechanical engineer position. Or you might start with a summary, creative and motivated engineer with more than 10 years of experience. Someone had mentioned that having your own domain for an email looks good. And I can see that. Certainly you can. It's not required. I would go out and purchase it unless I used that for maybe a consulting business I had, or there was some specific reason to. If you have done, maybe you were a warehouse manager and you have your own domain, I'm going to actually question whether you have a side business, potentially. And again, that's just the way I see it and the way I've seen it and the reasons I've seen it in the past, and not all employers are going to feel that way. It can benefit you, certainly, but a Gmail and Outlook are perfectly fine too. But thank you for your comment. I really appreciate that, Joyce. The next one you're going to get to is your experience. It's usually more important what you did than where you did it. There are exceptions to this. Sometimes you want to show the company ahead of the part you played within that company, but those are very, very specific and rare. So you're going to put industrial engineer, and then on the right-hand side, you're going to put the dates at which you were there. Another thing to consider is if you worked for a temp agency and did a ton of different jobs within a short period of time, group them under the temp agency like Manpower or Kelly Services, and then put highlights of employers you worked at within that. That way you're showing consistent work history under one employer because the temp agency is your employer. If you didn't put that there and just put all the different companies, you're going to look like a job jumper, someone who didn't give a return on investment for the training the employer put in. Also, if you worked for a company that changed names or locations or was taken over, there's ways of formatting that. And I'll send an example of that for you so that you can choose which best promotes you, which is in your best interest. As long as you're being truthful, there's a lot of different ways to tell the same truth. I call it situational truth. And I'm not being fancy with words there. There are a lot of different true ways of saying the same information that one may benefit you more than the other. If you're going with a combination resume, you would talk about the skills as opposed to where you did those skills. So you're going to use the skills as the titles. And then your education is going to be usually at the bottom. You can leave the dates off. It's more than 5 years ago. Other resume sections you can use is military experience, volunteer experience, leadership experience, memberships, awards, training certificates. But again, you don't have to put them on there simply because you have them. They have to have a purpose toward the intended goal, meaning that they have to show that you are uniquely qualified for this position. They can't just be things you're proud of. So sometimes we leave things off. I have a special engineer's license, which means I can work on boilers. In the office work I do, in almost all cases, that's not needed. So it's something I like, something I'm proud of. I leave it off my resume in most cases because it doesn't add to the information I'm trying to give them. So I'm going to leave you with some accomplishment statements on how you create these. These are the toughest things we do. I know I'm not spending a ton of time in this, but I hope I can show you the value in engaging in this. So remember I was talking about the skills that you could just list in bulleted points, like kept inventory, called customers, customer service, those kind of things. That doesn't tell them what you did. That's just kind of a topic. So instead of saying kept inventory, you could say manage daily inventory of over 1,000 classifications of medical supplies as a bullet point underneath the job position. This makes it stand out because numbers stand out, figures in general stand out, percentages, dollar signs. Another one is called customers. You could say grew client base from 0 to 70 within 2 months by effectively using cold call techniques. Anyone who's new to sales would have a similar story, but this sounds so much more impressive to say it like this because it shows results as opposed to just I was tasked with something. Don't say you were responsible for or tasked with something. Say what you did with that task, with that responsibility. I'm going to be sending everyone a cover letter resource guide. Don't skip this step. We're not talking about cover letters today. This is about resumes, but I do like to mention it quickly. Cover letters can only help you if they're well done. And if they allow them, I do them. I know it's a lot of extra work, but I really focus my job search on opportunities I'm truly interested in. If you're applying for 10 jobs a day, it'd be really hard to write 10 cover letters a day. But if you're doing, a couple a week, it's still a lot of work, but it can be the tipping point. I've interviewed hundreds of people, and I have to say, when I had a well put together cover letter, it told me this person was truly interested in this job. They had invested more of their time and energy into this application than someone who didn't, and it only benefited them. In the information I'm going to be sending you, it'll tell you exactly what to do with it, and there's even some samples there for you to look at. So I'll send you the link to that. Finally, resume reviews. I've mentioned this several times. I'm going to mention it one more time. Do not send your resume to me. I don't have the capacity to do that for all these groups that I get together with. Send them to your local career force location, and I'll send you a link that's called the Career Force Locator. It will give you access by putting your zip code to the closest location to you. You don't have to do the closest. I mean, if you're in the metro and there's 8 of them within driving distance, that's fine. They're going to know local employers. You don't have to go in for these. These can be done by emailing. They can be done on through an online meeting. It can be done over the phone even, and then you send it to them. But have someone look at your resume. It's a really good step before you submit it. Anyways, thank you, everybody. I know we went just a minute over. I apologize for that. Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking this time on a holiday week to spend a little time investing in your job search. Please reach out if there's anything we can do to help you with mock interviews, labor market research, skills identification, and of course, the resume reviews. Thanks for your great questions, by the way, and engaging in the chat box. I'll send off the recording and all of the material I promised you by the end of the day tomorrow. Good luck in your job search, and I hope it's a short one for you. Have a great day, everybody.